Okay, so you probably remember Gregor Mendel and his P's from school, right? Simple, dominant, and recessive genes. But what if I told you that's just scratching the surface? Let's dive into the really fascinating, complex world of genetics that goes way beyond those basics. I mean, the simple model says a dominant allele always wins, always masks a recessive one. But is it really always a straightforward competition? What happens when traits don't just win or lose? What if they blend, or share the spotlight, or even have one gene telling another gene what to do? That's exactly what we're going to explore. All right, first up, let's look at what happens when alleles decide to cooperate instead of compete. This is where we get to see traits that are a beautiful mix of both parents, creating something totally new. This first one is called incomplete dominance. The easiest way to think about it is like mixing paint. Neither color, or in this case, neither allele, completely overpowers the other one. So the result, in an offspring that has two different alleles, is a perfect blend of both parents. And here's the perfect example. You take a red snapdragon, cross it with a white one, and what do you get? Pink! The red allele doesn't totally mask the white one, so they meet right in the middle. It's a really beautiful visual case of genetic blending at work. Next up, we've got a different kind of sharing. It's called codominance. Now, instead of blending together into a mix, both alleles show up, fully and separately. Think of it less like mixed paint and more like a mosaic, where you can see both of the original traits side by side. A really powerful human example of this is sickle cell disease. People who are heterozygous for this trait actually produce both normal round red blood cells and sickle-shaped ones. Now look at the map on the right. Here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Having this trait, being a carrier, actually provides resistance to malaria, and that's why the sickle cell allele is way more common in places where malaria is a major threat. It's a survival advantage hidden in a disease. Okay, let's level up the complexity. What happens when there are more than just two versions of a gene out there? Or what if one gene can just boss another one around entirely? You see, for a lot of genes, it's not just a simple choice between two options. When more than two alleles for a single gene exist out there in a population, we call it multiple alleles. And as you can imagine, this dramatically increases all the possible combinations and traits you can get. The textbook example, and one you probably know, is our ABO blood type. There are actually three different alleles, A, B, and O, that combine to give us our four main blood types. And on the right, you can see another great example in rabbit coat color, where four different alleles create this whole dominance hierarchy, from full color all the way down to albino. Now, this one is really cool. It's called epistasis, and it's basically like a genetic override switch. This is a crazy interaction where one gene can completely mask or hide the expression of a totally different gene at a different spot on the chromosome. Just look at these adorable Labradors. So one gene determines if their fur is black or brown. Simple enough. But a completely separate gene, the E gene, decides if any pigment gets deposited in the fur at all. So if that second gene blocks the pigment, it literally does not matter what the first gene says. That dog will be yellow. That's epistasis in a nutshell. Okay, now let's zoom out even further. The truth is, most of our traits aren't controlled by just one gene. Polygenic traits are the result of many genes all working together, each adding a little piece to the final outcome. And this is what creates a continuous spectrum of possibilities. Human skin color, height, eye color, these are all perfect examples, right? There isn't just short or tall. There's a whole beautiful range of heights. And when you graph these kinds of traits in a population, you get that classic bell curve, with most people falling somewhere in the middle. Let's switch gears and talk about the X and Y chromosomes. Because when it comes to these guys, inheritance follows a whole different and really unique set of rules. So females have two X chromosomes, while males have one X and one Y. So how do you prevent females from getting a double dose of all the genes on the X chromosome? Well, the body has this really clever solution. In each and every cell, one of the X chromosomes is randomly shut down or inactivated. It scrunches up into this tight little structure called a bar body. And if you want to see this process in action, you don't have to look any further than a calico cat. The gene for fur color in cats is on the X chromosome. So, in a female cat, some cells randomly shut down the X carrying the allele for black fur, and other cells shut down the X carrying the allele for orange fur. And the result? You get this beautiful living mosaic of orange and black patches. So this process leads us to what we call sex-linked traits. These are traits controlled by genes that are physically on the X chromosome, and they affect males more often for a simple reason. Males only have one X chromosome. They don't have a backup copy. So if they inherit a recessive allele on that one X, they're going to express that trait, guaranteed. A really famous historical example is hemophilia, the bleeding disorder. This family tree, this pedigree, tracks the disorder through the royal families of Europe, and it all started with Queen Victoria. She was a carrier, and she passed that recessive allele to her sons and through her daughters to other royal houses. As you can see, the single gene on a single chromosome literally ended up shaping European history. But here's the final and maybe the most important twist. Your genes are not your destiny, not by a long shot. The environment you live in, the world around you, plays a huge role in how those genes actually get expressed. It is the ultimate collaboration between nature and nurture. And we see this everywhere in nature. The amount of sunlight a plant gets can determine if it flowers. The pH of the soil can change a hydrangea's flowers from pink to blue. And for a Siamese cat, temperature actually dictates its fur color. Pigment only develops in the cooler parts of its body, like its ears, paws, and tail. So how in the world do scientists untangle what's genetics from what's environment? Well, one of their most powerful tools is twin studies. They look at a trait and compare how often it appears in both identical twins who share 100% of their genes versus fraternal twins who only share about 50%. As this chart shows, a much higher concordance rate in identical twins tells you that genetics plays a really big role in that trait. Phew! So to wrap it all up, inheritance is so much more complicated and interesting than just simple dominant and recessive genes. As this table shows, we've seen how traits can blend, how they can share the spotlight, how they can be influenced by tons of different genes, and even be switched on or off by the world around us. And really, it all leads to this. Who we are is this incredibly intricate dance between the genetic blueprint we're born with and the world we experience. And that leaves us with a final big question. Knowing that we're a product of both nature and nurture, what does that truly mean for who we can become? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.